evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Two communist regimes are collaborating on suppressing protests. The same Chinese military branch that suppressed the Hong Kong protests is training Cuba's special forces to crush the protests there. A bipartisan plea for the Biden administration to get illegal immigration under control, especially now as the U.S. battles rising cases of the CCP virus. A Texas Democrat congressman says his community is facing unprecedented challenges. As large blazes scorch the western states, decimating over 1.6 million acres of land, President Biden stressing the need for more resources to fight against wildfires. The Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox. That's just one of many details contained in a leaked document. If you plan to see a Broadway show as theaters reopen, you're going to have to show proof of vaccination. And you're still going to have to wear that mask. Cuba rights activists met with President Biden at the White House today. Earlier this week, they marched with thousands of Americans to draw attention to people of Cuba and their plight for freedom under the communist regime. NTD's Steve Lance has more from the Capitol.
In light of the freedom protests that started in Cuba on July 11th, President Biden has just met with the leaders of the Cuban community to discuss how the United States can assist the Cuban people in their plight for freedom under the communist regime.
Well, I'm honored to welcome members of the Cuban-American community and Senator Menendez, Senator Meeks to discuss how the United States is going to continue to stand with the Cuban people who have suffered decades under a failed communist regime.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Governor Ron DeSantis both wrote to the president this week urging his administration to take action. One of the major topics discussed was the Cuban people's access to information. It was widely reported that shortly after the anti-government protests broke out in Cuba, the communist regime shut down the internet. The Biden administration says that they are exploring all options as to potentially supplying internet or figuring out ways to educate the Cuban people as to how to bypass the internet blockade imposed by the Cuban regime. Earlier in the day, White House Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre reiterated that President Biden believes that communism is a universally failed ideology.
That Cuba is led by a failed and repressive regime, and that communism is a universally failed ideology.
Last week, the Biden administration did place sanctions on 2 Cuban officials, but there were calls for the administration to take more action. Just prior to the president's meeting today in the White House with the Cuban rights groups, additional sanctions were placed on the Cuban regime. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Steve Lance, NTD News.
The Chinese military may be closer than you think. A group of photos shows China's paramilitary training Cuban special forces just outside Havana.
ADN Cuba, a new Spanish-language media, recently obtained this set of photos. In black, the Cuban regime's special forces, also known as the Black Berets. And in green, the Chinese regime's People's Armed Police, a branch of the Chinese military. NTD Talking Points host David Zhang interviewed an ADN journalist and an exiled Cuban author to find out more.
They have been sharing private groups like the same organization that has been sanctioned recently by the administration. And the photos began circulating around February, which is exactly around the same time that the Cuban state press published a story about how the Chinese military was modernizing.
According to the press release from the U.S. Treasury Department, the Cuban regime deployed the Black Berets to suppress and attack demonstrators during Cuba's recent anti-communist protests. The Treasury Department sanctioned the Black Berets last week for its human rights abuses.
Maybe for around a year, the Cuban regime itself, it was telling the Cuban people that they were expecting an uprising, un estallido social in Spanish. So it seems to us that it's pretty clear that they said it themselves that they were expecting this, and they have been training for a long time, perhaps, into how to control these uprisings.
China's armed police also specializes in so-called social stability missions. During the Hong Kong protests in 2019, Beijing is believed to have sent the People's Armed Police to suppress protesters. Several diplomats told Reuters that there were as many as 4,000 of them in Hong Kong.
Some of the things which I think parallel Hong Kong is the fact that the Black Berets at first were not used during the day. They were used at night. They didn't confront the massive demonstrations. They identified protesters, and then they did house-by-house searches and raids to pull them from their homes and arrest them.
ADN could not confirm when the photos in Cuba were taken, but they did learn the location.
This happened 25 kilometers east of Havana in headquarters called Punto 0.0. This is a place that has been known by training paramilitary forces that have been deployed into Latin America in the past.
Frahela says the Cuban Black Berets were active in repressing dissidents and activists, even before the recent protests. She calls on the U.S. to pay attention because all this is happening only 90 miles from our shores.
Today on Capitol Hill, a bipartisan plea to the Biden administration to get illegal immigration under control, especially now as the U.S. battles rising cases of the CCP virus. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham stood alongside Texas Democrat Congressman Henry Cuellar. They're calling for Biden to appoint a border czar to tackle the surge. The Texas Democrat says his community is facing unprecedented challenges due to the illegal immigration surge. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
The two lawmakers are urging Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas to do more to support border agents and communities facing the brunt of the illegal immigration surge. Texas Democrat Henry Cuellar represents border city Loretto. He says the administration doesn't have to take his word for it, but instead listen to the pleas of the communities.
People are just walking through. You heard from some of the school officials say, hey, what about our schools? And there have been lockdowns in schools. Because they're right at the border and people started just coming through and they worried about their kids. So
the surge has forced Catholic charities and other nonprofits to shut down. And more than 80 patrol agents in the Rio Grande and Loretto sectors have contracted the CCP virus. Over 200 hospital beds are occupied in the area. And Loretto's mayor is concerned that citizens will have to compete with undocumented immigrants for hospital space. The mayor filed a lawsuit to block the influx of immigrants into their city.
Let's put rational policies on the table very quickly. It's not rational that I can't go to Canada because it may hurt the United States COVID problem and completely ignore a border that's on fire when it comes to COVID.
And I've asked the secretary, why are the legal visa holders a health issue, but the undocumented not a health issue?
They agree that what's needed is a new pair of eyes to tackle the immigration crisis. They want President Biden to appoint a border czar, namely former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson, who served in the Obama administration. Graham says most Republicans respect Jay and solutions would come quickly if he took up the task.
And he was compassionate, but he followed the law.
Both Cuellar and Graham support DACA and a strong border security as well.
And right now, Democrats are trying to include immigration reforms such as DACA and other pathways to citizenship in their $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. President Biden says he does support this. However, ultimately, the decision is up to the Senate parliamentarian, who's an advisor overseeing Senate rules. So while Biden and many Democrats are pushing to include immigration reform in the budget bill, it's unclear whether or not it can actually be done. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
A leaked report by the CDC says the war has changed. Even though Americans are dying and being hospitalized with COVID at very low rates, NTD's Miguel Moreno has the details.
The CDC's leaked report was published by the Washington Post. In it, the agency says the Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox, likely to be more severe than the ancestral strain, and may be equally contagious among vaccinated and unvaccinated people. To back up some of their points, they used foreign, unreviewed studies from countries like Singapore. To conclude, they said the war has changed, also saying they'll reconsider other community mitigation strategies. Could this mean lockdowns? On Thursday, the White House said it's open to the idea if the CDC recommends it. A day later, we got a different response.
So our goal is to make sure that we are not headed towards that. That is not going to be the direction that we take, because we have the tools to prevent that.
Fact is, cases are surging, but people are being hospitalized and dying of COVID at a rate so low we haven't seen since March 2020. The CDC report also cites data from Scotland, Canada, and Israel, all showing that 2 Pfizer doses were still extremely effective at keeping people from dying or being hospitalized with the Delta variant. Governor Ron DeSantis already said it. He's not locking down.
There's a movement to try to impose more restrictions on the American people. And I just want to say, in Florida, there will be no lockdowns. There will be no school closures. There will be no restrictions and no mandates in the state of Florida.
The CDC hasn't gotten back to us, and they haven't verified the report or published it, so much of what's contained is still in question. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
As theaters in New York City reopen, Broadway audiences will now need masks and proof of vaccination. The Metropolitan Opera and Carnegie Hall also plan to restrict entry for children under 12. The Broadway League says all of New York City's 41 Broadway theaters will require guests, performers, and staff to be fully vaccinated for the CCP virus through October. Masks are also required for audience members. The announcement comes days before Broadway's reopening after a 16-month shutdown. The league says it's making exceptions for people with medical conditions or religious beliefs that prevent vaccination. But they would still need proof of a negative CCP virus test taken close to the show date. And a major business advocacy group says New York City's recovery is going to get hurt if companies decide to follow the CDC's mask mandate proposal. NTD's Phil Zhou has the story.
Nonprofit organization Partnership for New York City says another mask mandate is going to stop people from returning to the office. The organization has over 300 members and business leaders who employ over 1 million New Yorkers, according to its website. Last month, the nonprofit estimated 60% of workers will return after Labor Day weekend, working at least 3 days a week in the office. But it says that's all going to change if New York City follows the CDC's recommendation to require masks indoors in public spaces. Having offices filled with workers is important to the city because commercial real estate taxes make up a large portion of tax revenue. If workers don't return, property value can go down, and so will the tax revenue. Major firms like Goldman Sachs, Chase Bank, and Morgan Stanley say they are watching and monitoring the mask situation. Companies like Apple and Uber have delayed workers' return to October. That's 1 month later than expected. Lyft is pushing back its return to office date to next year, February. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
Protests are breaking out in Italy over the recent Green Pass vaccine passport regulation. And the most recent protest took place on Thursday right inside the lower house of the Italian parliament.
Chaos erupted on Thursday inside the Italian Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of parliament, when some members of parliament held a protest over the Green Pass vaccine passport. The protesters are members of a national conservative party, the Brothers of Italy. One politician was filmed dodging security guards as they tried to take away a no green pass sign from his hands. Others also made their way down to the floor holding similar signs. Videos of the lawmakers protesting circulated widely. And on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, hundreds of Italians came out onto the streets of Rome to protest.
I decided to join this protest because I think, regardless of whether or not a person has been vaccinated, each of us has the right and the freedom to choose the treatment. I am free to choose what is best for my health.
The Green Pass is a vaccine certificate. With CCP virus cases again on the rise, the measure is an effort to avoid a return to pandemic lockdowns devastating for the economy. The certificate will be used to decide who can access indoor venues like gyms, museums, indoor restaurants, and other events, including public exams. To get the pass, you need to have had at least one dose of the CCP virus vaccine, have recovered from the illness in the past 6 months, or have proof of a negative test from the last 48 hours. The measure goes into effect Friday next week.
Following the release of the new data about the Delta variant and breakthrough cases, people are questioning what effect current vaccines will have as the CCP virus continues to mutate. NTD speaks with Dr. Robert Malone, bioethicist and inventor of mRNA vaccine technology. Here's his take on the most recent data.
Many people are raising concerns about the effectiveness of COVID vaccines against mutations and variants, following a surge of new information this week about the Delta variant and breakthrough cases, coupled with the CDC's new mask guidance for vaccinated people. Dr. Robert Malone, bioethicist and inventor of mRNA vaccine technology, says this, coupled with what he called the CDC's recent chaotic messaging, has caused alarm bells about the possibility of vaccines causing antibody-dependent enhancement, or ADE. ADE occurs when the virus antibodies generated can't prevent infection. Instead, they act as a Trojan horse, allowing the virus to get into cells and worsen the disease. Malone noted that coronavirus vaccines have a long history of ADE, including the dengue fever vaccine and the RSV vaccine.
The term durability applies here. How long is a vaccine protective for after administration? And we now know that with Pfizer, which is the lowest dose of the mRNA vaccines, and probably produces less protein than the recombinant adenovirus vaccines, that durability seems to be about 6 months. And so if ADE was to show up, one would expect it to start being observed about 6 months after the first people that received that particular vaccine had been vaccinated, if there was a circulating virus. And that's consistent with some of the data that's being observed.
In a press release earlier this month, Pfizer said it was working on a third COVID booster shot. The company wrote, as seen in real-world data released from the Israel Ministry of Health, vaccine efficacy in preventing both infection and symptomatic disease has declined 6 months post-vaccination, although efficacy in preventing serious illness remains high. Israel has just begun rolling out a third Pfizer booster shot for those over 60 years old, with the Israeli president receiving a third dose today. Leaked CDC slides obtained by NBC this week conclude that because of the Delta variant, breakthrough infections may be as transmissible as unvaccinated cases. According to a new CDC study released today, of the 469 virus cases detected in Barnstable County, Massachusetts, 74% occurred among fully vaccinated people. The bulk of the infected people did not require hospital care, but among the 5 that did, 4 were fully vaccinated. Malone emphasized that there's not yet any proof that COVID vaccines cause ADE, but said he's been carefully watching for signs and that from what he's observed, the possibility should be looked into.
You try to identify the things that could happen and then watch carefully for them and see if there's any evidence of that. And that's what I do. It's part of what I do for a living. And just like a stock analyst, only I do it for infectious disease. And this looks like what I would expect if antibody-dependent enhancement were to happen. And I've been alerted to this because it is the known risk of coronavirus vaccine development historically for decades. So I've been watching for it. Now things seem to be aligning.
Some medical professionals, such as epidemiologist and Harvard Medical School professor Martin Kulldorff, are advocating for natural immunity for the young and healthy as a path forward. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
President Biden met with a group of governors virtually today to discuss how to better fight the wildfires spreading quickly in the western states. It's the second time they've met.
During the meeting, President Biden warned that we have a long fight this year against the wildfire.
Our resources are already being stretched to keep up. We need more help.
Governors from 7 western states gave an update on the status of the wildfires and also asked for more federal support.
We just simply need more boots on the ground. We can't do without you. About 7,400 people, 7,400 already. We're not in fire season.
Democratic governors attributed the wildfires to climate change. The governor of Washington said the biggest worry is that Biden's plan to reduce carbon emissions and limit climate change may not pass Congress through reconciliation.
We have to have those climate investments. There is only one way to save these forests from the ravages of climate.
However, environment expert Sterling Burnett told NTD that there are several reasons for these wildfires. Climate change is not among them.
The temperature has gone up about 1 to 1.5 degrees in the West, across the United States. That's not enough to spark these large wildfires. What is to blame is decades of land mismanagement out west.
Burnett explained that federal forests are overgrown. State policies limit bush clearing, leading to a buildup of wildfire material. Federal policies also restrict firefighting efforts when the fire starts in the wilderness.
You basically set yourself up for disaster when you manage land badly, when you say, let's let nature take its course. And then when nature takes its course, you complain that, humans are causing climate change.
According to the National Interagency Fire Center, currently 83 large fires have burned 1.7 million acres in 13 states. Nearly 22,000 firefighters, support personnel, and other teams are at work across the country.
Heat waves are sweeping the nation. In some states, temperatures climbed well into the 100s on Friday, creating dangerous weather conditions. Over 60 million Americans were under heat advisories on Friday. The scorching weather affecting states from the southeast to the Pacific Northwest. Parts of Idaho and Washington saw triple-digit temperatures. High temperatures and humidity could lead to heat-related illnesses, the National Weather Service warned, particularly for people who stay outdoors. Late last month, a days-long heat wave in the Pacific Northwest killed hundreds of people and paralyzed a region accustomed to temperate summers and where many residents do not have air conditioning. And coming up, what is critical race theory? We bring you a panel that explores the quasi-Marxist theory in the context of the work environment and how for some its presence in America reflects the Cultural Revolution in Maoist China. And Berkeley's City Council recently passed a resolution to include vegan meals at public events, senior centers, and jails. The goal of the resolution is to limit climate change, although the science behind it is disputed. More in just a moment here on NTD News. Critical race theory is a hot topic, but it may not be easy to understand. That's why the group Heritage Action for America hosted a discussion in Georgetown, Delaware on Thursday. The speakers included an employment lawyer and a woman who grew up in Maoist China. NTD's Kevin Hogan has more.
Join us here this evening.
Speakers discussed how to stop critical race theory from dividing families and the nation.
I do have compassion for others who
Stephanie Holmes is the founder of a consulting firm and an employment lawyer. She says there are lawful ways to achieve diversity and inclusion in the workplace, though she points to certain training that employees are encouraged to attend, including discussion of white fragility, white guilt, and systemic racism. She says employers who use these types of training may not be considering the risk that they're breaking the law.
But here, if employers are consistently requiring employees to participate in this type of training or have these conversations where their racial group is being portrayed negatively, that could constitute a hostile work environment claim.
Another speaker, Shi Van Fleet, grew up in China. She was in school during the Cultural Revolution, and when she finished school, the CCP forced her to work in the countryside and the fields for 3 years. She says being in America now feels like being back in China's Cultural Revolution.
It's the same tactic. It's Marxist tactic. So what they do is create chaos, like Mao said, 天下大乱,天下大治. They want to create the chaos so that they overthrow the existing system.
The host mentioned a bill that Heritage Action supports. It's called the Stop CRT Act. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas introduced it earlier this month. The bill would implement President Trump's executive order banning federal agencies and contractors from using critical race theory training. According to Heritage Action, CRT is a descendant of critical theory, which came from the Frankfurt School and is built upon Karl Marx's ideas. The Institute says a way to stop critical race theory in your school is to call federal legislators and ask them to support another bill, the Combating Racist Teaching in Schools Act. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Officials in California's Berkeley City have voted to provide vegan meals at public events, senior centers, and jails. Studies have suggested that a vegan diet will have minimal impacts on the resolution's intended goal, stopping climate change. NTD's Cynthia Kai has more.
Berkeley, California will soon offer vegan options in jails, senior centers, public events, and other city buildings. On Tuesday, city officials passed a resolution that aims to reduce spending on animal products in half by 2024. Here's what some individuals in the area are saying.
There's so many different reasons people have dietary restrictions, and this is going to include all of those people for all of those reasons. So yeah, I think that's awesome.
This initiative was supported by advocacy group Direct Action Everywhere. The group advocated for 100% vegan options, but city council members opposed the idea, saying they do not want to go that far yet.
I understand that due to their religious reasons or some other reasons, some people prefer the vegan food. So yeah, it's pretty much better to have options for them.
According to the resolution, reducing meat and dairy consumption is part of the city's plan to address climate change by cutting down on greenhouse gas emissions. However, a study by Our World in Data found that while going vegan does produce slightly less carbon dioxide, changing the way we eat will not solve climate change on its own. It would buy us more time to do so. Berkeley was also the first city in California to pass legislation back in 2018 prohibiting gas lines in newly built homes and buildings. Cynthia Kai, NTD News, California.
Officials in San Francisco welcome baseball fans back to a renovated park. Professional baseball player Brandon Crawford attended the reopening. We hear more from NTD's David Lamb.
Fans of the San Francisco Giants were celebrating the reopening of this baseball field today. And little San Franciscans can now step up to the plate and batter up.
I love the Giants. Me too.
What's the first thing you want to do?
Probably run around the grass and then play some baseball.
Okay. What about you?
Maybe me too.
Thank you everybody for being here and who helped put this thing together and help with the field. And
Crawford said baseball taught him life lessons and resilience through the field. The Gilman playground is owned by the San Francisco Parks and Rec Department. It's located in the Bayview and Hunters Point community. Officials say this is part of a renovation effort to change pools and recreation centers for the community. One of the speakers said the turf is from the same company that makes the turf in the Oracle Stadium, where the Giants play. David Lamb, NTD News, San Francisco.
Coming up, the subway flood nightmare is not over in China. This time, another major city is experiencing it, and passengers are fleeing in panic. And China's draconian lockdowns are back. Virus cases are rising again across many cities. Some supermarkets are emptied as locals panic buy. Find out more here on NTD News.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now. Retailers have canceled MyPillow, and to thank you for your support, I'm going to pass the savings directly on to you. For example, you get my 6-piece towel sets, regular $109.99, now only $44.98, or MyPillow dog beds for as low as $19.99 with your promo code.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
Kids will be kids, which just goes to say kids will be curious. They get into everything. If there's a loaded firearm in the house, they could get their hands on that too. Keeping firearms locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition in a place inaccessible to kids can help keep your loved ones safe from family fire. Safe gun storage saves lives.
Floods in China are not over. A brief rainstorm is causing a subway station to flood in southern China. Passengers hastily fled the station. This as some are seeing parallels to Zhengzhou's subway flood. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Yet another underground subway station is flooded in China. This time it was in South China's biggest city, Guangzhou. Locals there are seen quickly running out of the station. Online videos show large volumes of water rushing into the Shenzhou subway station. That's after a brief rainstorm hit the region on Friday. The rainwater completely submerged the train tracks. Water levels rose rapidly and rushed deep into the station. Staff and passengers evacuated hastily. Authorities say that the rainwater got into the station because construction workers knocked down a water barrier wall. Drainage systems were also overwhelmed. Authorities have since suspended services at the affected stations. Many see parallels to the deadly subway flood in Zhengzhou recently, but fortunately, the flood this time wasn't as serious. The affected subway line is close to 40 miles long and has 21 stations. Don Ma, NTD News.
Many cities in China are seeing a rise in CCP virus cases. Local communities are being locked down and masses are seen lining up for virus testing. In some cities, including Beijing, residents are panic buying en masse. NTD's Don Ma has more.
A virus outbreak that began in China's Jiangsu province is spreading. Starting from Nanjing City, the virus has transmitted to at least 15 cities and 7 provinces. That's including the country's capital. Authorities are enforcing mandatory lockdowns in districts across different cities. Up to hundreds of people in Beijing are seen lining up at virus testing locations. Residents are feeling uneasy about the situation. At some locations, locals are panic buying en masse. An online video shows a supermarket in Beijing with entire store shelves being almost empty. This as people try to buy what's left. A similar situation is seen at markets in the capital city of Sichuan province. Entrances to some Beijing communities were also sealed off and without notice. One local resident was out for a stroll and found that he couldn't return home.
这是西北门，已经让封住了。 我就想知道出门穿拖鞋遛弯的人他怎么回去。
As of Friday, at least 10 communities in Beijing have been locked down. On Thursday, authorities issued notices telling residents there to self-isolate. A video shows virus protection personnel forcibly dragging someone to a quarantine facility. The rise in virus cases comes despite 80% of Beijing's population have been vaccinated. This according to official data. They also got China's homegrown shots. Don Ma, NTD News.
The first person convicted under Hong Kong's national security law was sentenced to 9 years today. The charges included terrorist activities and inciting secession. Human rights groups are concerned about the long-term implications.
The first person ever convicted under Hong Kong's national security law was sentenced to 9 years in prison on Friday in a watershed ruling for the city. 24-year-old former waiter Tong Ying-kit was charged with terrorist activities and inciting secession. He was accused of driving his motorcycle into 3 riot police last year while carrying a flag with the protest slogan, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times." The phrase was ubiquitous during Hong Kong's mass pro-democracy protests in 2019, but judges ruled that the slogan was capable of inciting others to commit secession. They also said on Tuesday that Tong's motorcycle was a potentially lethal weapon and his actions a deliberate challenge mounted against the police. Human rights groups have criticized Tong's conviction. They say it imposes new limits on free speech. Tong was not given a trial by jury because of a perceived risk of the personal safety of jurors. He was also denied bail in line with a provision of the national security law that puts the onus on the defendant to prove they would not be a security threat if released.
The new Prime Minister of Samoa has confirmed she will cancel a China-backed port project, but she hasn't closed the door to China. All this against a backdrop of intensifying regional competition between Beijing and Washington. Jason Albano reports.
Under new leadership, the island nation of Samoa is treading more cautiously as China and the U.S. look to secure power in the Pacific waters. On Friday, its newest Prime Minister, Fiame Naomi Mataafa, reversed a promise the old government made to build a new port on China's dime to the tune of $100 million. Mataafa called the project excessive for a nation already heavily indebted to Beijing. She indicated she would only approve investments that had clear benefits for Samoa.
There seems to be a renewed interest in the Pacific, which may be a good thing, but not necessarily. We do have a very broad scope of partners for development. So for us, it's a matter of prioritizing, having a review, and then engaging us in where, we could work successfully with each partner.
Though this stretch of the Pacific has been largely uncontested since World War II, the country of 200,000 people has found itself exposed to a geopolitical tug-of-war between Washington and its allies and a more assertive Beijing. But China remains Samoa's single largest creditor. Its debts to Beijing, worth $160 million, account for 40% of its external debts. Mataafa, however, has said her government will assess its relationship with China in the same way it evaluates all of its bilateral relations.
And the latest at the Tokyo Olympic Games. China currently has the most gold medals with 19, and following closely behind are Japan and America. Track and field has now officially begun, and that could change which country will take home the most medals. NTD's Jason Perry gives us the Olympic update.
Megan Rapinoe converted the deciding penalty in a shootout against the Netherlands, and the United States will advance to the semifinals of the Women's Olympic Soccer Tournament. Afterward, Rapinoe joked about the pressure she felt before the penalty shot, saying, "The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose the whole thing." And track and field has officially kicked off. Solomon Barega of Ethiopia won the first track and field gold medal of the Tokyo Olympics with a victory in the men's 10,000 meters. Barega upset the world champion and the world record holder Joshua Cheptegei of Uganda, who came in second place. And there will be no Golden Slam for Novak Djokovic. The top-ranked Serb lost to Alexander Zverev of Germany in the semifinals of the Tokyo Olympics tennis tournament. Djokovic was trying to become the first man to win all 4 Grand Slam tournaments and an Olympic gold in the same year. Steffi Graf in 1988 remains the only tennis player to achieve the Golden Slam. Heavyweight Akira Son has won Japan's 9th gold medal in judo at the Tokyo Olympics. Japan has won 11 medals in the first 13 weight classes in judo. And back to track and field. A faulty exchange in the Olympic debut of the women's mixed 4x400 relay has cost the U.S. a spot in the final. It also might have cost Allison Felix a chance to win her record-setting 10th Olympic medal. Felix is qualified for the women's 400, which starts next Tuesday, and she could also run in the women's 4x400 at the end of the meet. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And coming up, a French member of parliament says that recent data shows the vaccine might not be as effective as we thought. This as the virus continues to mutate. And cruise liners are banned from Venice, but Venetians are divided over the move. Activists are happy, but tourist operators say the city needs the business offered by the cruise industry. Find out more in just a moment here on NTD News. According to experts, new variants of the CCP virus are to be expected, but they may also be less dangerous. NTD's David Vives met with a French doctor and lawmaker who says the latest data shows vaccination may not be effective enough to quell the virus.
Vaccinated people can still transmit the CCP virus, and breakthrough infections aren't actually that rare. That's according to an internal CDC note published Friday by the New York Times and the Washington Post. In France, several cases of transmission among vaccinated people have been reported. According to doctor and French member of parliament Martin Vonner, there may even be situations where vaccinated people are more at risk than those who are unvaccinated.
A researcher told me this story. In Guyane, in a gold mine, there's a new outbreak. The more concerned people are those who have received the 2 shots. Why? Because there are 2 variants, Delta and Gamma. And it seems non-vaccinated people have a better natural immunity against the 2.
According to experts, the virus will likely continue to mutate, creating more variants. But those variants also might be less dangerous. Voners say viral evolution is normal, as the virus responds to treatment.
This is totally normal. The vaccination campaign put the virus under pressure. It is then mutating, but it is also both more contagious and less dangerous.
According to microbiologist and infectious disease expert Didier Raoult, the Delta variant is 60% more contagious, but less and less people are dying from it. Vonner says this casts doubt over the efficacy of the vaccine campaigns.
We see that the vaccination does not protect against the latest variants. This is normal, as the first vaccines were created with the Wuhan strains.
However, some studies still support the vaccine's effectiveness. According to one published on July 27th, the Pfizer vaccine is 80% effective at preventing serious illness. This number had reached 90% before the Delta variant, the study says. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
From tomorrow, cruise liners are banned from Venice. Activists are happy, but tourist operators say the city needs the business offered by the cruise industry. NTD's Joanne Robson has more on this.
When the first cruise ship since the pandemic set sail through the Venice lagoon last month, some were not happy. Hundreds of Venetians rallied on land and small boats to demand an end to giant liners passing through the historic city. And the government seemed to listen this time. A few weeks later, it announced a ban on cruise liners from the Venice lagoon from the 1st of August. This activist is concerned about safety and the environment, including pollution and underwater erosion.
I'm very proud. For us, it's a big victory, not a small victory.
He felt they were finally victorious in their David versus Goliath battle.
Us ordinary citizens with our little boats, simple and self-organized, against these giant ships that are not only giant in terms of size, but also in power and money.
The ban will prohibit ships weighing more than 25,000 tons from the shallow Giudecca. That's where a cruise ship collided with a dock and tourist boat, injuring 4 people in 2019. The government's move came after UNESCO threatened to put Italy on a blacklist for not banning liners from the World Heritage Site. This environmental scientist felt glad at the city's actions.
A split second after feeling relieved about that, all the other issues started coming to mind about the urgent need for a long-term solution to the problem.
The government's move ended years of political hesitation, but it put the demands of activists, residents and culture bodies above those of tour operators and port workers who just came out of lockdown.
It was a very huge blow. I felt awful. I felt I had lost the certainty of my life. We had just resumed work on June 5th, after 19 months of inactivity and 19 months without work.
Some tour operators say Venice without cruise ships will not be able to survive.
It's just crazy. I mean, from a port and from a territory that made his fortune on the port activities, on the maritime traffics, we're going to become just a little bit more than a small marina.
Venice's councillor for tourism says the decision comes too late and is too rushed.
Because they did not listen to the city's voice, we now have a solution that could have been ready 5 years ago and which instead arrived at the last minute, after a lot of controversy that lasted years and which created huge difficulties for the workers, who have lost their jobs overnight.
The government now plans to build a terminal outside the lagoon for large passenger vessels. Joanne Robson, NTD News.
Simon Woodhead has gone from working in the high-speed mechanical world of Formula One racing to being among nature and producing award-winning English wine. NTD's Neil Woodrow drops by the vineyard.
Simon Woodhead has been producing wine in the South Downs National Park for a decade, going from barren slopes to award-winning wines. Here in the south of England, in an historical hamlet in West Sussex, Woodhead established Stopham Vineyard in 2007. Previously, he worked as an engineer for Team McLaren in Formula One racing, designing automotive sensors. In the early 2000s, he moved to Spain, and it was there he became attracted to winemaking. In 2004, he decided he wanted to study winemaking and production, and so enrolled on a course in the UK, and says it was a stroke of fate how he ended up setting the business up in Stopham.
Well, I was doing the course at Plumpton Agricultural College near Brighton, and we were just at that time we were studying vineyard establishment. You know, what do you need to establish a vineyard? You need a nice slope, at low altitude, pointing to the sun. You know, free draining soil. And I came here for a party, and saw the fields and thought, yeah, this is it.
The slope is more important for vineyards in England compared to France or Germany, as we are further away from the sun. The vines need maximum sun on the fruit. Currently, they are doing what's called canopy management, de-leafing to improve the amount of sun reaching the fruit and to concentrate the energy into them too. It takes 3 years from the initial planting of the vines before the maiden harvest of the grapes can take place. Simon tells me you need passion and dedication to drive through hard times, which normally come through the weather.
Some years have been great. 2018 was perfect, but this year was pretty rough. You know, during growing, when they started growing in April, we had many frosts. Then we had torrential rain. That went on to Germany, actually. And we lost quite a lot, so we're sort of down 50-60%. Still, we got 40% of total crop.
He says they are generally achieving 60 to 65% of a full crop. He tells me about the wines they're producing.
Yeah, such as Pinot varieties, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Chardonnay. We make sort of white wine and sparkling wine. And, you know, they benefit from a cooler climate.
The grapes are normally harvested around October in England and they bottle late spring, early summer. I put it to Simon that some say English wine is expensive.
Well, it used to be. I don't think it's that expensive anymore. It's sort of par with champagne, sparkling wine. the same sort of par. Still wine's perhaps a little bit more expensive, but we are using, as the French call, noble vine varieties that don't have huge clusters, so it costs more to make wine here. So yes, it's a few pounds more perhaps for the still wine, but nothing serious.
Their sparkling wine is made in the traditional or classic method, like champagne. And what about the taste of their wines?
Well, the cool climate, is really beneficial to our wine. The long ripening period, we get all sorts of flavours, so it can be more flavoursome.
The wines are slowly fermented for 4 to 6 weeks in these stainless steel containers that help build and preserve the fruit flavours. They have a team of 5 covering 21,000 vines over 6 hectares. Simon says that there is a growing interest surrounding the business.
Yeah, we've really noticed an interest in local products and in English wine, in our wine. And people are surprised how good it is. So yes, I can see a lot of other people thinking about planting, because it's great growing something, producing a fruit and making a product that everyone loves.
Stopham Vineyard has won the Independent English Wine Awards for the best English still wine for the last 3 years. On the label you'll see the 200-year-old Mediterranean pine that sits among the vines. A recent report by Vinescapes Consultancy says that the South Downs National Park has plentiful opportunity for further viticulture development. Currently only around 0.4% of farmland is used for vineyards, but 34% could be suitable. In Stopham Vineyard's case, the soil was unsuitable for crop growing, but great for vines. Wines produced in England are gaining in popularity. You can find them in some Michelin-star restaurants. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, South Downs National Park.
A Mexican zoo is celebrating its latest addition, a baby hippopotamus. At approximately 1 month old, this baby hippo is reportedly in good health and currently weighs about 110 pounds. His doting mother, Tammy, is never too far from her offspring. Zookeepers are still not sure if the calf is a male or female. Hippos have been identified as a vulnerable species, with populations in Africa decreasing due to poaching for their ivory teeth and a lack of access to fresh water. Hippos are the 3rd largest land animal by weight, and a fully grown adult can weigh up to 3 tons. And that's all for tonight's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.